I'll watch anything. I'll watch black and white films. I'll watch color films pretending to be black and white. I don't care. I don't mind weird aspect ratios or artistic choices made by directors who think they can recreate the French New Wave. I'll watch movies in any language humanity can record. I'll watch tired plots created by Netflix writers at the rate of 100 a month. I have loads of patience. That's until I click play on a silent film. It's the silent part that gets me. I get distracted easily. I find myself on my phone. I end up having to rewind a lot. There are a few exceptions to my affliction. Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton have earned and always managed to keep my attention. I found that comedies are much easier to consume in the silent format. Dramas tire me out though. I tried watching Intolerance, Love's Struggle Throughout the Ages, with little success. However, every once in a while I discover a movie whose narrative power thunders through the silence. The Big Parade is a silent era war movie that swept me off my feet. Metropolis is an enigmatic masterpiece that I think about quite a lot. The reason I clicked play on The Passion of Joan of Arc was the movie poster. The close-up of Renée Falconetti got my attention, and I had no choice but to see why the reviews and the ratings were declaring it a revelation in silent era filmmaking. I agree with the reviews and ratings, but for a reason that surprised me. But before I get into that, let's talk about Joan of Arc. The movie opens as the final lines in Joan of Arc's story are being written. She's been captured by the Burgundians and is about to go on trial for heresy against the Catholic Church. But who was she before that? Who was she before highly ranked Catholic theologians accused her of being a servant of the devil? Who was she before they exerted their collective influence to see her burnt? Before this, she was a very devout 14-year-old who started having visions of Saints Michael, Margaret, and Catherine. In these visions, she was given very specific tasks to achieve, the most important of which were to liberate France from the English and to make sure that Charles VII was crowned as king. You'd think the saints could have appeared to a well-seasoned soldier or a highly experienced politician, but no, they picked John, and so John had no choice but to carry the weight of France's future. As a 14-year-old, she could do nothing about this holy mission. However, when she was 17, she decided that it was time to act. Through outright begging and perseverance, she found herself in front of Charles VII and managed to convince him that she was indeed sent by God to save France. What's surprising is that her presence worked. Within months, France was able to push back the English. She was instrumental in breaking the siege of Orleans and became a good luck charm to French soldiers in more battles after that. She also managed to get Charles VII crowned at Rheims Cathedral. Consequently, France now had a legitimate king on its throne, a king who could unite the people against the English. One would imagine that after this, Joan of Arc would end up being one of the most powerful women in Europe. One would be wrong. Not only does the king abandon her, he also fails to ransom her when she is captured by the English-aligned Burgundians. So why are the Burgundians obsessed with a 19-year-old girl? Why would they go to the length of recruiting the most respected theologians in France to judge her? For revenge, obviously. Not only did she legitimize Charles VII, she also got most of France believing that God was on their side. Her existence will prove to be the flap of butterfly wings that leads to the end of the 100-Year War, if the flap of butterfly wings was so loud that all of Europe could hear them. In this movie, these theologians press John with the kinds of questions that a naive 19-year-old might fall victim to. Fortunately, John is too devout and too in tune with her faith to be trapped. Despite lacking formal theological training, she manages to go toe-to-toe with them. In the process, she even wins over some of the theologians. The questions that are being asked here have a simple implication. Is John the servant of God or the devil? Or to be direct, is John the servant of the Catholic Church? You need to remember that the Catholic Church in this case is the English/Burgundian version of it. The French version, the one that crowned Charles VII, was okay with her and thought he was indeed a servant of God. As the movie progresses, she gets more bogged down with the questions, the physical and psychological torture, and the threats upon her life. Given this movie mirrors her trial perfectly, in the end they manage to convince her to sign a piece of paper that declares her a heretic. If she signs it, she will spend her life in prison instead of burning at the stake. She immediately regrets signing the paper and confesses to the judges that she'd like to recant. She still believes herself to be an instrument of God. It was a mistake for her to lie by signing the paper. The Burgundians had been waiting for this. It was an opportunity for them to get rid of her. The movie ends with her burning at the stake. Chaos followed her death. An entire nation's lucky charm had just died, and very few on the French side could let that go. Even some of the theologians who participated in her trial thought that they had committed a grave sin. 2.5 decades later, once Charles VII had pushed the English out of France, her trial would be overturned. In 1920, she would be canonized by the Catholic Church, turning her into one of France's patron saints. How many times would I rewatch this movie, honestly? While the acting of Renée Falconetti is great enough that I'd recommend you watch this movie if you haven't already, the story itself is not enough for a rewatch. It's the kind of minimal story that would have worked greatly if this movie had been released as a talkie. Think about 12 Angry Men. Think of what could have happened to that great movie if it was reduced to using title cards. That's the weakness that The Passion of Joan of Arc has. If it was a talkie, then the great dialogue in the title cards could have led to greater tension and an even greater movie. Why then will I rewatch this movie? Why did I decide on that 15 minutes in? It's because of the operatic soundtrack. Wow, I'm not an opera person, but the marriage of Richard Einhorn's Voices of Light soundtrack and Caldera's cinematography resulted in one of the most enjoyable movie watching experiences I've had this year. In the early minutes of the movie, I thought that this was always the intended soundtrack. Imagine my shock when I found out that Voices of Light was recorded in 1994, and so I had to ask myself an uncomfortable question: is it the music I like or the movie? I went on Apple Music, listened to the soundtrack, and while 2 of the songs in the soundtrack were good enough to be added to my library, the soundtrack as a whole suffers when it's divorced from the movie. Therefore, despite my thought that the story is good but nothing to write home about, the combination of Renée Falconetti's superb acting and Richard Einhorn's music produces what I can only describe as genius. If you are to watch this movie, make sure you pick the version that uses Voices of Light as the soundtrack. You will not regret it.